I want to start by saying just a couple things as we prepare ourselves for tonight. As Job is going to give a lament, if you will, to his struggle. Part of his struggle most certainly is the pain and the suffering that he's going through physically. But much of the pain and the suffering that he's going through is as hard as it is to struggle with the physical stuff, is the emotional stuff that he's experiencing that's probably even worse. And it comes because of those that call themselves friends, right? And I've said this before. I just feel like it needs to be said again, that if you're a student of God's Word and you're studying the book of Job, you pick up any commentary at all on the book of Job, more than likely you'll have a lot of information regarding chapter 1 and chapter 2. But right after that, things get just a little fuzzy. There's not much commentary. And oftentimes what happens is that we just glean through it very quickly. Commentaries tend to do that too. I have such a hard time with that. And I'll tell you why. All those chapters, all these verses are there for a reason. It's not meant for us to just ignore. What's easy, I think, is just to say, well, here are three friends, here's their horrible arguments, and just so ignore that. Understand that Job's crying out. He doesn't understand why. Just know that up front too, and let's get on to the last part of it, where God shows up and speaks. That's fine if you're in a rush. But for us, brothers and sisters, I think it's important that we examine every chapter and every verse. And the reason why is because God deemed it important for us to look at. So, we started the book of Job, and I said to you, we won't be in the book of Job very long. It's going to go pretty quick. And boy, I'll lie about a lot of other things too. And so here we are tonight, and we're in chapter 12. And one of the reasons why I say this out loud is because, brothers and sisters, I think that if you take the time to look at it, I think that it does help us. I hope that it's been more than you just tolerating it. I pray that it has helped you as we've studied this together. I don't think it was by accident that I didn't think about my circumstances. I wasn't thinking about what Dawn and Don have been going through and say, let's go through the book of Job. We didn't do that for that reason. It was just the Spirit leading us. But I will tell you that going through this book at the time that we did was God ordained. And it is still today. So I say that to tell you, don't lose sight of what's happening before us. Take the time to study it. Read it throughout the week so you can get some clarity too as we're studying it together. I want to now remind you again for maybe the 18th time that as we look at this book, we have to be reminded that when Job is crying out and he's in pain, he's feeling the experience of people he calls friends who have no clarity at all about what they're saying. The circumstances don't fit their evaluation at all. Job is experiencing pain after pain after pain from just the relationship. Job doesn't know that God has allowed this. Job doesn't know that Satan and God have had a conversation and that God initiated the conversation. He's the one who said, by the way, have you considered my servant Job? Because he's blameless and he's upright. I say that because when you know that God is in it, right? And I know that that's hard to imagine that we would say otherwise. But sometimes we feel like God's not in it, right? And we don't have the answers. We don't feel like God's answering our prayers. Job's in that moment. That's where Job's at. Job doesn't know. God's looking down and saying, Job, I got your back because I know you. Because you're faithful to me. And you're upright. You're not without sin, but you have done the things that are required to come before me, to seek my face and be dependent upon me. Your family, your possessions, and everything that you have, you've not gripped them so tight as if they were your own, but you've just stewarded those things. You've given them back to me, and you've given them back to me knowing that it's mine to begin with. That's his attitude. The struggle that Job has is in much the same way that we talked about last week as we thought, why is it that we look at the circumstances and we're told this information that Job doesn't know? Well, I think it enlightens our heart when we can see the example of Jesus as he hung on the cross and he cried out and he said, my Father, why have you forsaken me? He never had experienced the separation from the Father. Now you can understand why Job is in the place that he's at. He's known the relationship that he had with his Father, and it's in this trial and struggle that he's wondering, God, why have you forsaken me? He doesn't know it all. I think it's important that you and I don't forget that, because regardless of whether or not we know it or not, God is faithful and God is there to walk with us every step of the way, even when we don't feel like He is. And yes, there'll be those times. Don, you described it earlier. You hear that voice in your ear saying, but you know what? You are at fault. You are going to be found guilty. And you know what? Job is feeling that same pressure. It is not that God wasn't there for Don. It was not that God was not there with Job. It was not that God was not there for you in your trial. That's His promise. You don't walk through these valleys. He walks with you. You don't do it alone. So I say that all to remind you that when you hear Job cry out, like you're going to hear tonight, it's important that you are reminded that Job was not privy to the conversation that took place between God and with Satan. Now, I want to say one more thing about last week, and then we'll get started. And by the way, we're on page 24 in case you want to jump ahead a little bit here. One more thing real quick, and that is this. Job's struggle with Bildad and Eliphaz and Zophar is not always just their opinion of what is happening, but it's the opinion that doesn't fit the circumstance, okay? So tonight, so that you know how I've chose to word it, I'm going to use the system, okay, the word system, to describe what Zophar, Eliphaz, and Bildad are describing to Job, okay? It's their system of theology. It's their system of what their belief is. And what we're going to find out is that Job is going to question that system, okay? So if I use the word system, I'm talking about their belief. I'm talking about their evaluation of why. And I hope that this won't get forgotten in our series, in our time together. But it is so simple to remember, but just don't forget it, okay? Because I say it's simple. It's not simple to remember. It sometimes just gets lost. Good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. Now, we've said is that a true statement? No. But that is the system that they're working in, okay? So, for those of you who haven't been with us, over the course of this study, you remember that even the disciples looked at Jesus and said, "Oh, about this blind man, Jesus, who was it in his family that sinned?" Right? Bad things happen because of bad people, because people have sinned. Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad all look at Job and say, "Job, good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people." And if you, Job, and this is where we ended last week, if you, Job, Zophar says, Job, just repent. Now let me ask you, anything wrong with what he said so far? No. Not a thing. Zophar, if you by faith will pray and cry out to God, He will be quick to forgive you. Any problem with that so far? No. And by the way, Job, once you do that, you'll have calmness in your life. You'll regain your quality of stuff again. And life will be grand again, because good things happen to bad people. Anything wrong with that part? Yes. Absolutely. Now, it's a funny thing, is it not, that you can say something and that's positive and it be right, but at the same time that it's wrong. Remember we said, is it possible that something can be right but also be wrong at the same time? And this is what I'm talking about. You can give a portion of truth, but also add to it a portion that does not fit. And anybody who wants to ask the question, what is wrong with having quality of life because you're walking with Jesus? I will tell you that there will be a quality of life that you will have because you walk with Jesus. And it will be blessed, and it will be pure joy. But it will not mean that it will not be without suffering. It will not mean that there will be days that you won't be able to rub two pennies together. It does not mean that you have a prosperity gospel because you love Jesus Christ. Paul will tell you that he loved Jesus with all of his heart, and his life was changed. But he understood what it was like to not to have a place to lay his head, to be beaten, to be shipwrecked, and to suffer, all because of what he claimed Jesus to be in his life. Okay, so when you turn on the TV, and most of what you hear will be prosperity gospel, I suggest to you that you turn it as quickly as possible, and you remind yourself of the truth of God's Word. Because I got to tell you, prosperity gospel sounds really pretty. Sounds really great. But it's not true. And what so far is saying to Job is not true either. Okay? Now that's my introduction. Now, here we are, Job chapter 12, starting with verse 7. Verse by verse is how we take this, for those of you who haven't been with us before. And I need to explain this because I think it could easily get misconstrued if we don't understand what's taking place here. When I read it, I think you're going to understand it. What we don't know for sure, and certainly I'm not going to try to say, I know for sure that that's what he's referring to. But because of the language, because of the uses of certain words like you, he's going to talk about a moment ago, it appears as if Job is responding to something that was said that maybe we weren't privy to in the previous chapters that we've read. It's as if that Job is responding to what they've said, and he's now responding back to it. And he's saying, you said this to me. So you're going to kind of catch that in theory as we're going through this together, okay? So don't lose sight of it. We're speculating, but that's what it seems to address when we start talking about this. I think you'll understand what I'm talking about as we get into it, okay? So Job chapter 12, verse 7 and 8. Again, it seems like Job's quoting what his friends would have already said to him or what he would have known his friends to believe. You could say it in those two ways at least, okay? So Job chapter 12, verse 7 and 8. Let's look at that together. He is now going to describe that God, and he's saying, this is what you've said. This is how you've spoken to me. He says, but ask the animals, and they will teach you. Or the birds in the sky, and they will tell you. Or speak to the earth, and it will teach you. Or let the fish in the sea inform you. Okay, so Job says, you say to me that even these wild animals know what has happened to me. It's God doing this. Okay, so even these animals know this. In other words, just pay attention to them because they're going to tell you to say it to you again, and they'll say it to you again and again and again. Because you see the repetitiveness of it, right? Look at it again. Ask the animals, they'll teach you. Ask the birds, they'll tell you. Speak to the earth, and it will teach you. Let the fish in the sea, and it'll inform you. Again, you hear this repetitiveness. All you got to do, Job, is just listen. You just listen. If you listen closely, you'll understand. And Job is saying, look, you're telling me this stuff. You're saying just listen and you'll figure it out. Just listen and you'll understand that what we're telling you is true, right? That's what we're talking about here. Verse 9. Which of all these does not know? He said, out of the ones I've just mentioned, the birds and the animals and the earth, the fish and the sea, which of all of these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? So Job, listen. Everything and every creation knows why God has done what He's done to you. And now you've got to remember, Zophar is referring to good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. You just need to do the right thing, Job. That's what you got to do. In His hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. So he said, God has a control over all of this. Look at verse 11 and 12. Does not the ear test words as the tongue tastes food? Now, I don't know if you get what he's saying there. He says, what we have is something special here. I want you to understand that in this last part, look at verse 12. Is not wisdom found among the aged? Remember last week he was talking about, Job said to Zophar, he said, yeah, you gray-haired people, that's not a negative to any of you guys. I'm not looking at anybody specifically. But boy, there are a lot of you in the room tonight, including myself. But us gray-haired people that have all this wisdom that we've accumulated, remember Job said, he said, yeah, and it'll all die with you, right? Because you're the only ones who know. Remember we talked about that last week? Apparently you're the only ones who have the kind of knowledge that can say what God's will be. You've already got it figured out what's wrong with me. You know it like there's no tomorrow. So when you die, all this wisdom just going to die with you. That's what they said last week. That's what we read last week. So he says, Job says, look, Job demonstrated he doesn't understand God fully. He acknowledges that, There's an understanding about God that he doesn't know right now. But there's just something that Job just doesn't understand, right? There's a feeling of what Job is going through that he doesn't understand the reason why. And he's just trying to figure that out. And you know what? Can we all be honest that in those moments of why? I mean, sometimes it's almost like we're talking ourselves through it. We start off by saying, Lord, I don't understand why. Lord, I'm praying, but I don't sense you're with me. But we know he's with us, right? But in our hearts, that's just where we find ourselves in the moment. And that's where Job is. He's not denying God. He's not saying that God is wrong in what's going on. God, he knows that for whatever reason, the circumstances are on him, but he doesn't understand the why. He may never know the why, but he's asking. Now, verse 12 is kind of funny. He says, we've all been around a long time. And what we say is in line with these traditions or this system, that we've come up with, right? And that system is that we just believe that good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. And what I think Job is doing here is he's showing the shallowness of their belief system. Do you understand what I'm talking about? You've simplified this so easy. That what you said is that our faith, it's based upon this very simplistic idea. And that idea is that as long as life is good, it means you're good. But when you're bad, it means because you're bad. And he says, what I'm going to point out to you, and this is what Job's going to talk about, is that it's an example of the inadequacy of what he is facing when what they're saying because of the reality of what Job is going through. They're talking about things, and it's not to say that sometimes God doesn't allow us to go through trials, right? I mean, let's be honest about this. There are times that God allows us to go through trials because we're not walking with him, because we're not being obedient to him. And sometimes he has to bring us to our knees before we look up. But what's happening here is his friends have just written this off as to say, it has to be this way. It's simplistic, it's shallow. And that's what Job is talking about. He said, you're thinking so shallow about this system that you got. That's not right. And he's going to point that out as we go on tonight. And he says, and by the way, especially in the circumstance that I'm in, not that Job is bragging about his faith or who he is as a person, but boy, can we not acknowledge this, ladies and gentlemen? Can we not acknowledge the fact that as believers in Jesus Christ, you know that you know who you are and you know whose you are. And we also know that the conviction of the Holy Spirit speaks into our heart about the things that are not right in us. Job is looking at his circumstances and he's saying, I'm not standing here to tell you that I am perfect. I'm telling you that I'm standing here as a man who has been obedient to God and that I am on my knees before God. I have laid these sacrifices before him, not as works, but as an act of faith and trusting who God is. And you're telling me that I need to repent? And I'm telling you, and I'm not putting words into Job's mouth, but I think what Job would say is, I'm telling you, I have always continually repented. and given everything that I am and every sin that I have to Him. That's why I don't understand. But yet you have this idea that something bad has happened in me because I'm just a man who has this hidden sin that don't want to tell anybody about it. And somehow, if I could just get past this moment, it's going to be okay. Job says, your idea, your system is not right. And by the way, understand this. I think that Job would acknowledge the fact that he's going to grow from this, that Job probably kind of believed somewhat the same system. And he's going to learn and grow from this too. We already realized that parts of his theology was wrong in the beginning too. And he's seeing it played out over and over again, that God is teaching Job along the way as well. So it's not by just like Job's perfect in his thinking. Job is growing too. Job has this idea that when you die, that you're in a slumber sleep and you don't feel anything, you don't experience anything. And that's not true. And so he's going to learn that along the way. And he did learn that. Okay, verse 13 and 14. Let's look at that together. I know that we've only looked at a few verses, but do you understand why that most commentaries just go right past this? Not important, not necessary. I hope that you deem it to be necessary. Look at verse 13 and 14. Here's quite a powerful statement, if nothing else. To God belong wisdom and power. Counsel and understanding are His. Do you see that combination of wisdom and power? This is what Job knows about God. Because when you put wisdom and you put power together, do you realize what that means? I didn't put this in your notes, but maybe you might want to write this down. When you put wisdom and you put power together, it's crucial. Because both knowing what to do and having the power to do it, wow, now that's pretty powerful. God not only has the knowledge of what to do, but He has the power to do it. And Job is saying, to God belong wisdom and power. That's why Job's looking at the circumstances and he's saying to himself, I don't understand why, but God has the power to do this. God has the knowledge. And I don't understand it. I don't understand why I'm going through it. Counsel and understanding are His. What He tears down cannot be rebuilt. He understands some aspects and characteristics of who God is. He understands that God is all-powerful, that He's all-knowing, that He's omnipresent. He is everywhere. He gets it. What He tears down cannot be rebuilt. Those He imprisons cannot be released. That's how defining He is of who God is. This beautiful combination of wisdom and power. And what does God do? Well, we just saw it at the end of verse 14. He says, God tears down and God shuts a man up. I think it's what we're going to learn. I didn't put this in your notes, but I want you to add this to your notes. I think this will be helpful, if nothing else, just to outline where we're going, okay? Could you write down, first of all, verses 13 to 15? Could you just write that down? And then right under it somewhere in your notes, write down verses 16 to 21. And then from there, write down verses 22 to 25. I want to give you a heading beside of each sections of those verses, okay? This will help you to kind of see what he's talking about. God has the power to bring up, and God has the power to tear down. He's going to talk about in verses 13 to 15 about natural disasters. That God has the power to hold it back, and God has the power to bring it on. Verses 16 to 21, and this is a repetitive thing, but he's talking about it with different aspects of creation. He says, you want to talk about leaders? Chapter 12, verses 16 to 21. He can do that with leaders too. He has the power to raise them up. He has the power to tear them down. And then in verses 22 to 25, he doesn't just talk about leaders, then he talks about nations in verses 22 to 25. So when we look at the start of 13 and we go through verse 15, he's talking about that he has the wisdom, he has the power to bring this up, and he has the power to tear it down. Look at verse 15 now that you have a little bit of that background. If he holds back the waters, this is we're talking about natural disaster. If he holds back the waters, there's a drought. If he lets them loose, they devastate the land. To him belongs strength and insight, both deceived and deceivers are his. So far from it being that God is just of a reliable natural order. He's in control of that, yes, but he's a God of natural disaster. He has the ability to oversee all of those things. And Job's friend's system could not account for this. Do you understand what I'm talking about there? So he's saying, look, there's that which he is able to control that is natural, that is a natural order of things, but there's also this natural disaster that occurs. And guess what? The good and the bad all suffer through it. It's not just one group, it's not just one aspect of people, but it touches everybody. So far in Eliphaz and Bildad, you have this idea in your mind that good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. But let me tell you that God has the ability to touch people in all those aspects. Your system is not right. That's what we're getting at here. That's the point that Job is crying out and making here. Look at verses 17 to 18. Now he's talking about rulers. He leads rulers away, stripped, and makes fools of judges. So that means he can change the outcome of those things too. He takes off the shackles put on by kings and ties a loincloth around their waist. This is the fate of the human traditional wisdom, like that of Job's friends are going to find out later on. Your crazy thinking, the fate of your human belief system that you add into your faith, guess what? You're going to be hung by that. You're going to experience the struggle of that. And Job's friends later on are going to learn that lesson very, very, very deeply. I don't know if you noticed this, but God even undoes the power of kings. I bring that up tonight only to say this. That you know what? We pray and we're active in what we do in terms of, politics and making sure that we vote for those who have the right moral values. Well, let me tell you, aren't you glad that God has that power? That He puts people in high places, He can also bring them down. God is in control. Nothing takes Him by surprise. I want you to look at now verse 19, because the same is as with religious leaders too. Boy, how does this apply to our current backdrop here and where we are today? The rise and the falls of people who are spiritual leaders. I knew I shouldn't bring this up. We've only got a few minutes left. I'm amazed how quickly our time goes by. Please don't laugh. I know this. I have a poor track record as a young man. I'm just going to say this up front. A young boy, I didn't understand everything about Jesus. I just want you to know that. Man, the people that I admired as Christian leaders, boy, they just failed me. As a young boy, I'd get off the bus and I'd run into the house as fast as I could. Let me start by saying, first and foremost, it was because of Little House on the Prairie. Okay, so I had to get to the house so I could watch Little House on the Prairie. But listen, too, I had to watch Jim Bakker. I'm just going to tell you right now, I couldn't get enough of it. I told you probably this story already. They built this place for Christian families to go. It's almost like a theme park with, on residents, on the theme park. And I just thought, wouldn't that be such a swell place to be? Just a bunch of people who love Jesus and they get to ride rides every day. You're in 5th grade. That's what you're looking for, right?
I've seen that place. It was crazy.
See, and I didn't get to be there. I only saw pictures. Then, as bad as that turned out, okay, air-conditioned dog houses and all the other stuff that you know about Jim Bakker. And way too much makeup for Tammy Faye. I mean, it just gets worse and worse. But you may not know this about me. Not many people do. I love music. I love to sing. My mind is still sharp enough that I'm pretty good at memorizing music. And sometimes I will listen to a song over and over and over again. Because when it touches my heart, I just want that to be a memory in my head that I don't lose. And I fell in love with Jimmy Swaggart. Over and over and over again. Why do I say that? I didn't mean to waste 4 minutes. But verse 19 and 20 is a reminder. It's a reminder to all of us. He leads priests away, stripped, and overthrows officials long established. I don't care how long you've been in ministry. I don't care how long you've been in power, that God can move you to. He silences the lips of trusted advisors and takes away the discernment of elders. Oh, by the way, again, especially those who are true trusted advisors. Remember that when we talk about Eliphaz and Bildad and so forth, because that's going to come up later on. And what he does with leaders, by the way, he does with people. So if you're thinking, oh, well, you know what, watch out, you pastors, because one day if you don't fly right, it's going to come back on you too. But I just want you to know that it's not just for leaders. It's for all of us. Verse 21 and 22. He pours contempt on nobles and disarms the mighty. He reveals the deep things of darkness and brings utter darkness into the light. He says, this is what you do. This is what you say that God is doing. And and we're listening to this, and some aspects of it is very true, and other aspects of it, you know what? The circumstances don't fit what you're saying. Your system is not accurate. And then he's almost done, but I just want you to hear the last few verses here of chapter 12 before we close tonight. He makes nations great and destroys them. They rise and they fall. He enlarges nations and he disperses them. He deprives the leaders of the earth of their reason. Do you understand what he's talking about there? Hey, you can have the knowledge, you can have the wisdom, and he can make you a foolish person. Well, Nebuchadnezzar understood that when he was so declining in his view of life that he was like a wild animal. There's certain aspects that's not just hyperbole. I mean, it's accurate. That God can take people naturally who are wise and have wisdom, and he can take you down, and he can take away your reasoning. Yeah, it's possible. That's absolutely true. He makes them wander in a trackless waste. They grope in darkness with no light. He makes them stagger like drunkards. And you can almost hear these words, right? As he's talking about perhaps the things that they've said to him. Look at where you were. You were a man of great wisdom. You're smart. You're a leader. You've been given much. And you know what God can do? He can give it to you. He can take it away from you. And aspects of that is very true. But we understand that what we're talking about here is a man who was faithful to God. And he's following God. And yes, these things can be true in one respect, but in the circumstances they don't fit. And Job is saying when you put that thinking into every single circumstance, it's not right. And this is wrong. That's why, brothers and sisters, that we just spent 45 minutes talking about this aspect that is so critically important. And why do I say that also? Let me say it again to you another way. It happens too often within the body of the church too. We automatically put assumptions on people based upon what we think. And we don't know anything about their circumstances, but we've already labeled it on them. And that's not appropriate either. And I think there's a fair warning in that for us too. Be very careful that you don't do that. About 20 years ago, it was probably about a month into my senior pastorate, I wasn't sure where our body was at when it related to other people. And I had a friend, and he did a favor for me. It wasn't original with me, so just know this up front. I heard about it. It's a good measuring stick for any church. I had a friend, believe this or not, he was more than willing to do this for me. Cody, I want to tell you this, brother. You know him, so I'm not going to say the name out loud. It wasn't Cody, by the way. I asked him, I said, would you do me a favor? I don't want you to shower for 2 weeks. Would you do that for me? Now, you know how many people are willing to do that? Not many. He did. I don't want you to shave. I don't want you to brush your teeth. I said, I want you to get as dirty as you possibly can. And I want you to come to church on Sunday morning. And I want you to walk. I want you to park your car down the road. In fact, I had him park his car across the tracks at this place over here. I don't know what the business was. I think it was a lock place at one time, but something like that. I said, park your car there. I want you to walk over here. And I want you to walk slowly into the building. And I want to see how people respond to you. And he walked in the building. No one spoke. He walked down the aisle early, wasn't there late, got there early, sat in a pew, and for the longest time he sat by himself. Now, you know what people say about this church? This is the church that loves building. This is the church that loves people. And that Sunday morning, I was being discouraged because I knew what was happening. You know, it was the most unlikely person that went down there and sat with him. I was floored. For all the people that passed him by, one of the people that I said wouldn't be him. He was the one who sat down. He not only sat down, but you know what he did? He actually invited this guy to go to lunch after service. It's amazing the people that God puts in our life. How you look at them and their circumstances. And you've already dictated what they are. Oh, that person can't be here for the right reasons. They're probably wanting something, you know. That's probably what this is about. And they're not probably very spiritually mature, you know. Just look at them. They can't be, right? We don't say that out loud, brothers and sisters. But you don't have to either. Because you know it if it's in your heart. And so that morning I asked him to stand up. And there were a whole lot of people that morning that had thought long and hard about how we look at people. And I think in many ways that dictated who we would become as a church too. I'm not saying we're perfect. I'm not saying, oh, well, yeah, you know what, we're loving on every person who comes through those doors. But it's a teaching moment to remind us that no matter what you think you are, you may not be that. And the people that you look at, they may not be what you think they are. And God can raise you up and God can tear you down. I think that Job looks at this situation, he says, look, I know what you're saying and I know that this is your belief. But I'm here covered in worms and I'm dying physically. But just because I am where I am and just because I've lost what I've lost doesn't mean that I am not a person who has sought the face of God with all my heart. We're going to see that. You'll hear that from him in our next chapter, chapter 13.